I came back from 3 days in the mountains to find my tools in the driveway, not stacked carefully, not covered. Just set out there in the October air like things that had stopped belonging to anyone important. My workbench had been dragged to the edge of the concrete pad. My father's hand planes, the ones I'd kept in their original wooden box for 31 years, were sitting on top of a trash bag someone had used as a makeshift tarp. It had rained the night before. I could see the water still pooled in the corners of the lid. My phone had a text from my wife, sent the previous afternoon. We finally converted the office into a nursery for when the baby comes. Your stuff is outside. Hope you're okay with it. Love you. I read it once. Then I sat in my truck in the driveway for 11 minutes. Not because I was too angry to move, because I was waiting to see if anger was even what I felt. It wasn't. Exactly. What I felt was something colder and more precise, the particular sensation of recognizing a truth you've been carrying without naming it. I got out, walked past my tools without touching them, and went inside. The house was quiet. My wife and her daughter had driven up to visit my stepson for the weekend. Nobody had asked me to come. Nobody had mentioned the nursery conversion either, until it was done and I was 200 miles away. I poured a glass of water and drank it at the counter. Then I called my attorney. My name is not a loud one. People have told me that my whole life. At 63, I've stopped taking it as an insult. I was a contractor for 34 years, mostly commercial builds, the kind of work that requires patience more than speed. You learn to read a site before you touch it. You learn that the most important decisions are the ones made quietly before anyone else arrives. I'd built the house myself, not as a metaphor. Literally, I'd bought the lot in 1997, drawn the plans on graph paper at the kitchen table of my first apartment, and spent 14 months putting it up on weekends and evenings. My first wife had helped paint the rooms. After she passed 9 years into the marriage, the house became the thing that held me together. Every wall I'd framed, every beam I'd set, I knew where every wire ran. I met my current wife 6 years ago at a neighborhood association meeting. She was funny, direct, and had the kind of laugh that made you want to earn it. Her daughter was 24 then, recently graduated, between jobs in the way that had started feeling permanent. Her son was 28, doing freelance something in a city 3 hours north. They were good-looking kids with expensive habits and the cheerful assumption that someone would always handle the logistics. My wife moved in 2 years later. Her daughter followed 8 months after that. Temporarily, they said, just until she found her footing. Her daughter had found a boyfriend within the year. He moved in too. I gave them the guest room that used to be my reading room. I didn't mind. I liked having the house occupied. I liked cooking for people. I liked the noise of it. The trouble with liking to be useful is that it communicates the wrong thing. People hear availability and mistake it for inexhaustibility. My wife would say, "You're so good at this." Whenever I fixed something or covered something or simply didn't object to something, good at this. Like steadiness was a talent instead of a choice. Like it didn't require anything from me. The first time my stepson asked to borrow money, it was $2,000. A bridge loan, he called it, because his client was slow to pay and his rent was due. I wrote the check. He paid it back 3 months later, $60 short, and never mentioned the difference. I didn't either. That was the template. His requests came in seasons after that. Not constant, just consistent. A car repair one spring. A security deposit on a new apartment the following fall. A laptop because his old one had died the week before a major pitch. I said yes to most of them. Not because I didn't notice the pattern, but because I decided early on that generosity was worth more than precision in a new family. I was wrong about that. Precision and generosity are not opposites. Precision is what makes generosity sustainable. My stepdaughter and her boyfriend were different. They didn't ask so much as they assumed. The grocery bill absorbed their preferences without discussion. The streaming services multiplied on my accounts. The utilities climbed every month in ways I tracked but never mentioned. When I did mention something once, the thermostat set to 78 in July, my stepdaughter looked at me like I'd questioned a law of physics. "It's just a couple degrees," she said. Her boyfriend nodded without looking up from his phone. My wife smoothed things over in the way she'd learned worked best with me. She'd come find me later, put her hand on my arm and say, "They're young. They'll get it eventually." She said this often enough that it became a kind of policy. "They'll get it eventually" excused most things. It became the sentence that locked every conversation I might have opened. When my stepdaughter announced she was pregnant, the house shifted. Not in a bad way, at first. There was a real happiness in it. I was going to be a step-grandfather. I bought a rocking chair. I started refinishing it on weekends in the garage, sanding it down to bare wood, restaining it a deep walnut the way my wife had mentioned liking. No one asked me about the nursery. That was not an oversight. My office was the largest secondary room in the house. I'd used it for 20 years. Drafting table, blueprints, a wall of bookshelves I'd built from reclaimed oak, my father's tools in their case by the window. My wife knew what that room meant. She had watched me sit in it on the anniversary of my first wife's death every year, quietly, with a cup of coffee and the window open, a ritual she had always respected without being asked. They'd gone through it in an afternoon while I was in the mountains. My stepson had driven down to help, which was the most work I'd seen him do in a year. My father's hand planes were on a wet trash bag in the driveway. I stood in the room that had been my office and was now painted a soft yellow. Crib still in its box. A mobile of wooden stars sitting on the floor, assembled halfway. My bookshelves were gone. I found them later, stacked in the garage, a crack in one of the middle shelves from being moved without support. I did not call my wife. I walked back to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and called my attorney. She picked up on the third ring. I told her I wanted to talk about the property. Not urgently, I said, but soon. She said she had time, Friday. I told her Friday was fine. I spent that evening doing what I always did when I needed to think clearly. I cooked a meal I didn't really need, cleaned the kitchen afterward, and sat at the table with a legal pad, not writing grievances, writing facts. The house was mine. I had bought the lot before my first marriage, built the house during it, and retained full ownership after my wife's passing. When I remarried, I had not transferred title. Not out of suspicion. It simply hadn't come up the way things don't come up when you believe in the permanence of things. My attorney at the time had suggested a prenuptial agreement. I had said I didn't think that was necessary. She had looked at me over her glasses and said she'd note that in the file. The mortgage was mine. No balance, paid off in 2019. The utilities were mine. The insurance was mine. My stepson was not on any account. My stepdaughter and her boyfriend were not on any lease. They were guests. Long-term, comfortable, increasingly permanent guests who had just redecorated the host's home without asking. I sat at the table for a long time. Outside, the oak trees I'd planted in 1999 shifted in the evening wind. I'd put them in as 2-inch saplings. Now they were taller than the roofline. I thought about my father. He was not a sentimental man, but he was an exact one. He used to say that a man who doesn't know what's his cannot protect what matters. I'd thought he meant tools and property. I understood now he meant something larger. I met with my attorney on Friday. We talked for 2 hours. I was not emotional in the meeting. I was precise. She appreciated that. We discussed options in the order of what I was and wasn't willing to do. By the time I left, the first steps were already in motion. Not a divorce, not yet. That would come later through its own process. What I asked her to begin was simpler. A formal property assessment and a quiet conversation with a real estate broker she recommended. I had decided to sell the house, not out of spite, out of clarity. I had built that house for a life that no longer lived inside it. Every room had been rearranged or claimed or converted without my voice in the room. The bookshelves I'd made were cracked in a garage. My father's tools had sat in the rain. The office where I had grieved and planned and thought for 20 years was now painted yellow without a single conversation. I was 63 years old. I was not interested in negotiating for space in a house I had built with my own hands. The broker came on a Tuesday while my wife and the others were out. She walked through every room with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned not to react to other people's lives. She said the market was favorable. She said the location and the construction quality were both exceptional. She said if I wanted to list it, she'd have it under contract within 30 days. I thanked her and said I'd be in touch. I was in touch the following morning. My wife and her daughter came back from their visit on Sunday evening. My stepson had driven down with them. I heard 3 car doors close in sequence from where I was sitting in the living room, reading. The sign had gone up on Saturday. I heard my wife before I saw her. The door opened and then she stopped, and the silence that followed was not the comfortable kind. My stepdaughter said something low and sharp. My stepson's voice came next, confused at first, and then not. My wife appeared in the doorway. She was still holding her car keys. The color in her face had changed in a way I recognized. Not anger. Not yet. Something before anger. The understanding that a wall you believed was fixed had moved. "What is that?" she said. I set my book down. "A for sale sign." "I can see that." Her voice was controlled. "Why is there a for sale sign on our house?" I looked at her. "It's my house." She crossed the room and sat across from me. My stepson stood in the hallway. My stepdaughter appeared behind him, one hand resting on the doorframe. "Explain this," my wife said. "I'm selling the house," I said. "You'll have 60 days from the closing date to make other arrangements. I've already spoken to an attorney about what that looks like legally." She stared at me for a long moment. "You're selling our house." "My house," I said again, gently. "It was mine before we married. I built it before we met. Nothing in our marriage changed the title." My stepson stepped into the room. "You can't just do that." I looked at him. "I can. I've been advised on it." "This is insane," my stepdaughter said. Her voice had risen. "I'm pregnant. We live here." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm giving 60 days. Because of the nursery?" my wife said. Her voice had dropped now. "Careful. You're doing this because of the nursery?" I held her gaze. "I'm doing this because of the nursery the way a levee breaks because of a single rainstorm. The rain isn't really the reason." She didn't answer that. My stepson pulled out his phone. I assume he was calling someone or looking something up, the reflex of a person who has always found someone else to solve things. My stepdaughter started crying. Not quietly, the kind of crying designed to fill a room. I did not feel cruel. I felt the way I feel at the end of a long build, when the last piece is set and the structure is finally what it was always meant to be. "I'd like everyone to take the evening," I said. "We can talk more tomorrow when it's calmer." My wife stood. She walked to the bedroom and closed the door without looking back. My stepdaughter followed her. My stepson stood in the living room for a moment, looking at me in a way I'd seen before on job sites. The look of a man realizing the ground isn't where he thought it was. "You're really doing this?" he said. "Yes," I said. He left without another word. I heard him go upstairs. I sat in the quiet living room for a while, looking at the walls I'd framed, the ceiling I'd raised, the fireplace I'd laid stone by stone on a cold November weekend 25 years ago. I did not feel victory. I felt accurate, the way a measurement feels accurate when the tape reads exactly what you knew it would. My wife knocked on the bedroom door around 9 that night. Not her bedroom, the guest room I'd moved into 3 days earlier. I had done that quietly, without announcement, the way I did most things. She came in and sat on the edge of the chair by the window. In the lamplight, she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the drive. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "Since I came home and found my father's tools in the rain," I said. She closed her eyes briefly. "That wasn't my idea." "You were there," I said. "You texted me. You didn't stop it." She looked at her hands. "I thought you'd understand. It's for the baby." I waited before I answered. "I would have understood," I said. "If someone had asked me, I would have figured something out. I'm good at figuring things out. You know that better than anyone." She looked up. "That's been the problem," I said. She started to speak and stopped, then tried again. "You could have talked to me." "I've tried to talk to you," I said. "Not about everything. About the thermostat. About the grocery bill. About your son and the money. Small things. Each time, the answer was, they'll get it eventually, or you're so good at this, or let's not make it a big deal." I paused. "I believed you." I kept waiting for eventually. Her eyes were wet. "So you're selling our home?" "My home?" I said, not unkindly. "You've lived here 4 years. I've lived here 26. She looked at me for a long time without speaking. I let the silence stay. I wasn't going to fill it for her. "Where will you go?" she asked finally. "I have options," I said. "I've thought about it." "And us?" I looked at my hands. Hands that had built the room we were sitting in, had fixed every hinge and switch and cracked piece of grout since before she knew my name. "I love you," I said. "I want that to mean something to both of us. Right now, it's mostly meaning something to me." She left without answering. I heard her go back to the bedroom. I sat in the dark for a while, and then I slept better than I had in months. The next 2 weeks were strange and quiet in the way a worksite gets quiet after a decision has been made and before the work begins. My wife moved between politeness and hurt in shifts. My stepdaughter called her mother often and stayed in the room with the door closed. My stepson drove back to his city without saying goodbye to me. He texted me once, "You didn't have to go this far." I read it and set the phone down. My wife tried again on a Thursday evening. She came to the kitchen while I was making dinner and stood at the counter. "The kids are scared," she said. "My daughter doesn't have anywhere to go. Not with the baby coming." "I know," I said. 60 days is enough time to make a plan." "You're not even angry," she said. "That's what I can't understand. You're just calm." I turned to look at her. "I've been angry for a while," I said. "I just didn't let it out where you could see it. I let it out on weekends in the garage and at 4 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. You didn't see it because I didn't want to make it your problem. That was a mistake." She leaned against the counter. "I should have asked about the office." "Yes. I should have asked about a lot of things." "Yes." She was quiet. "Is it too late?" I thought about that honestly. I thought about the man I'd been in this house for 4 years, patient and present, and slowly, thoroughly overlooked. I thought about what my father had said, about usefulness and belonging, about knowing what's yours. "It's too late for this house," I said. What else it's too late for, I don't know yet. The offer came in on the 22nd day. Full asking price, 30-day close. The broker called me while I was at the hardware store, and I stood in the paint aisle and listened to the numbers and said yes. I told my wife that evening. She nodded slowly, like someone accepting a weather report. 60 days, she said. 60 days from close, I said. That's 90 days total. She nodded again and went upstairs. I heard her call her daughter, then her son. The murmur of it carried through the ceiling while I sat at the kitchen table, the same table I'd bought at an estate sale in 2003 and refinished by hand, the grain coming up gold under the new stain. My stepdaughter came downstairs the next morning earlier than usual. She stood in the kitchen while I made coffee and looked at me the way young people look at older ones when they're deciding whether to be angry or strategic. "I just want to understand," she said. "Was it always about the money for you? The things you paid for? Is that what this is?" I poured my coffee and turned to face her. "No," I said. "It was never about the money." "Then what?" I thought about how to say it in a way that would land. "You had a baby shower last month," I said. 12 people in this house. I cooked for it. I cleaned up after it. I bought the decorations your mother picked out and I put them up the night before. I paused. "At the shower, your mother introduced me to people as the one who lives here too." Her expression shifted. "Not as her husband," I said. "Not as anything with a name. The one who lives here too." I picked up my coffee. That was 6 weeks before I came home to my father's tools in the rain. But that was the moment. She didn't have an answer for that. I didn't expect one. I found a small house 40 minutes east, a single story on a half-acre lot with a separate workshop already plumbed and wired. Old bones, good structure, needed work in all the right ways. I made an offer on it the same week the sale on my house closed. The day I moved out, I took my time. My wife helped carry boxes to the truck and we worked in a silence that was mostly respectful. My stepdaughter and her boyfriend were not there. My stepson had not come back. At the door, my wife held the frame with one hand. "I'll call you," she said. "Okay," I said. "Are we still?" She didn't finish the sentence. "I don't know," I said. "I think we find that out slowly." She nodded. Her eyes were dry. She was tougher than I sometimes remembered. I drove east with the truck bed full of tools and books, and the rocking chair I'd finished refinishing the week before, its walnut stain dried to a deep warm brown. I played no music. The highway was loud enough. The new house sat back from the road behind a windbreak of old cedar. I unlocked the door and walked through the empty rooms, the way I had in 1997 before I'd put a single wall up, just the rough shape of a future. The floors needed work. The kitchen was 30 years out of date. The workshop window faced north, which was exactly right. I set the rocking chair in the living room and sat in it for a few minutes, hands on the arms, watching the late afternoon light move across the bare floor. I thought about the years spent making myself small in spaces I had built, about how easy it is to hand a life over piece by piece in the name of love and call it generosity, about the difference between being chosen and being convenient, and how long it can take to understand that they are not the same thing. I thought about my father standing in his shop, smelling of metal and hand soap, telling me not to confuse usefulness with belonging. I was 63 years old. I had 30 good years left if I was careful. I planned to use them for something that resembled my actual life. My phone buzzed. My stepson. I looked at the screen and felt nothing sharp, just a dull acknowledgement of a pattern I was no longer willing to maintain. I set the phone face down on the floor beside the chair and looked back at the window. Outside, the cedars held their ground in the evening wind, the way old trees do. Not dramatic, not fragile, just present and rooted, and entirely their own. I had a lot of work to do on this house. I knew how to do all of it, and for the first time in longer than I could easily name, every bit of that work would be mine. There is something people don't tell you about choosing yourself late in life. They assume it will feel like triumph, like a door slamming, like a final chapter with the volume turned all the way up. It didn't feel like any of that. It felt like the first morning after a long illness, when you wake up and your body is just your body again, nothing borrowed, nothing owed, nothing performing. You make coffee. You open a window. The light comes in. My wife called that first weekend. Her voice was quieter than I was used to. She said her daughter had found a rental, a 2-bedroom in a town 30 minutes away. She said her son had offered to help with first month's rent, which she said as if it still surprised her. I said that was good. She said it was a start. We talked for 20 minutes. Not about the house, or the nursery, or any of the things we might have argued about. We talk the way people talk when they're not sure yet what they are to each other and they're choosing not to force it. It was honest in a way our last few years hadn't been. I didn't know what would happen between us. I held that uncertainty without trying to resolve it. Some things need time to tell their own truth. After the call, I went out to the workshop and uncrated my father's hand planes. The wooden box had dried out fine. I lifted each one, tested the blade, set them in a row on the new bench. The light came through the north-facing window flat and even, the kind of light that shows you exactly what you're working with. I picked up the oldest one, the one my father had used before me, and felt the weight of it settle into my palm, the way it always had. Then I got to work. If any part of this story felt familiar, if you've ever spent years being useful and invisible in a place you helped build, I'd like to hear about it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. We tell these stories here every day. Quiet decisions, late reckonings, and the particular courage it takes to finally take up the space you earned. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.